Tales of Mithrym.
Den of Thieves, read by Skye Part 12. Attack of Opportunity. The door of the tower slowly creaked outwards. Daylight spilled in on the passageway behind it, lighting up a floor of aging flagstones covered in mud, dust, and moss. A purple head poked out and looked from side to side. It settled at last on the figures of its two friends, sprawling on the ground, gagged and bound. The kobold ran over and began to untie its kin. As it removed the gag from one, it cried out, "Watch out! Watch out!" But it was too late. Ducky, Derval, and Elven all leapt out from behind cover and descended upon the newcomer. "Let's go," Ducky shouted, and ran through the doorway into the passage. The other two followed him. The passageway was short and opened out into a wide, high-ceilinged hall. Cracks high above were letting in streams of pale sunlight, dim with the coming of dusk. Where the light fell, they could see piles upon piles of bric-a-brac. Odd ends of this and that, all in various states of use or decay, were piled here and there. There were knives and forks, pillows and blankets, saws and hammers, dishes and cups. Everything was piled all around, and many of the softer piles appeared to have been used very recently for beds. The floor itself was soft underfoot, and there was a foul smell of filth to it. It took some time for their eyes to adjust to the dim light. As they did, though, their hearts fell. About 24 pairs of red eyes were staring back at them, each belonging to a kobold, grinning and brandishing a weapon. Knives, spears, trowels. One even held a pitchfork. The weight of it was clear, and it brandished it as a human might a poleaxe. Elven gripped his sword tight and turned around to take it all in. From behind them, above the entrance they had just come through, fell even more of the creatures. "It looks as though there is nothing else for it," he said, as every muscle tensed. He leapt forward at the nearest kobold. Ducky and Derval each did the same. Every time they swung their weapons, though, the kobolds only jumped backwards out of the way. Each time they did, they chuckled and cackled until soon the whole room was echoing with the terrible sound. The kobold with the pitchfork pushed forward and jabbed it hard towards Elven. As it did so, though, Ducky jumped onto the blades, pinning it down. He then brought his sword down hard on the kobold, which crumpled in a heap on the floor. Howls and yowls went up from the assembled host. Many of them began throwing small rocks and pebbles at them. Others began to climb up the walls and sat on ledges in the stonework where they hissed menacingly. Derval raised her axe to them and snarled. Just as they thought they were about to be attacked again, one kobold voice suddenly rang out above the others. "Mother!" it called. "Father!" From across the way, they heard another door creak open. Through it stepped two figures, not short like the kobolds, but about human height. Derval and Elven gasped at the sight. "Greenskin!" Ducky shouted. He looked the creatures up and down. "Ears like a fox, nose like a pig." "Goblins!" Elven yelled. He was not waiting to find out how else they lived up to their reputation, though. He ran forward, and Ducky ran with him. As they brought their swords down, so too did the goblins bring up their own swords. Great heavy things with blackened and notched blades. The sound of metal on metal rang out around the room. The kobolds jeered and yelled as they watched. Again, Ducky and Elven brought their swords down on the goblins, and again they were met with parries. Ducky held his sword hard against the goblins and pushed with all his might at the creature. The goblin's face suddenly broke out in a wide, beaming grin as it drew its head back, and then, in one swift movement, spat hard in Ducky's face. The great man reeled backwards, stumbling slightly as he let go of his sword with one hand in order to wipe his face. His opponent took the advantage and swung its great sword again. This time it buried itself hard in Ducky's arm. He howled in pain as blood began trickling down it. The goblin laughed a deep chuckle of a laugh and brought its sword up with both hands, ready to bring it down on Ducky's head. All of a sudden, though, its eyes crossed and it fell forward. Derval's axe buried in its chest. The other goblin stopped its assault on Elvin and ran to its fallen kin. As it did, Elvin buried his sword hard in its back. The creature yowled in pain and fell to the floor dead. Derval ran over and retrieved her weapon. Ducky was leaning against the wall, holding his hand over the wound in his arm as his eyes crossed from the pain of it. Elvin made his way over too. "Listen," Derval said hurriedly. "I need to go." "What?" Both men shouted together. "Are you going to leave us here?" Elvin exclaimed. "No, look." Derval looked round at the kobolds now drawing in towards them. You're just going to have to trust me." She spun round and knocked a kobold hard to the ground with her axe, then leapt up onto a ledge on the far wall. Near it was a crack in the rock, just wide enough that with some effort she slipped right through it. She was gone. Elvin swung his sword menacingly at the kobolds as they tried to close in. Ducky heaved his great blade up in one hand and growled at the creatures. "Why would she?" Elvin started to ask. "I don't know." Ducky was breathing hard through the pain in his arm. "But it looks like it's just the two of us again." "Together?" Elvin said with a smile. Ducky swung his sword at the kobolds and grinned. "Together," he growled. Just then, the kobolds all drew back. A faint sound came from the other side of the door again. "Grandad!" they all yelled at once.
Tales of Mithrym are written by Jimmy Clephane. Mithrym is a fantasy world built for the Dungeon Room role-playing game system. To find out more about the world of Mithrym, or to try out the game, go to www.mithrym.com.